What is up, everyone, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the 3&D here on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Make sure you hit subscribe below and follow our socials at the 3&D ETB and at ETB Network. Tonight we got a jam-packed episode for you guys as the ACC decided to accept 3 new teams. We'll go over that and the constant conference realignment that's going on throughout college basketball. USA just got knocked out of the FIBA tournament, so we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about the craziness that the FIBA tournament has kind of sparked with the Noah Lyles comments and the whole Gilbert Arenas, Kenyon Martin podcast that most of you have probably seen throughout Twitter. So I hope everybody's doing well. Some new news coming in throughout college basketball and throughout the NBA. So first things first, we're going to start off with the news about the FIBA tournament. So Lithuania knocked out USA in the FIBA tournament this past Sunday morning specifically. It was a close game. 110-104 was the final, but USA was not able to come away with the victory. Lithuania ended up defeating them. This does not mean the end for USA. They ended up going 4-1 in tournament play, and they're going to play Italy in the losers brackets. But Lithuania advances to the finals, and they'll play for the championship of the FIBA tournament. A few interesting things throughout the game. Anthony Edwards had once again a tremendous game. He's clearly been the star player for this United States team. He had 35 points on Sunday with 2 assists and 3 steals as well. Nobody even came close to that. The next highest scorers were Michael Bridges and Jalen Brunson, who both had 14. We obviously expect a lot of high things from any USA team that plays in a FIBA tournament, who plays in the Olympics, regardless of, where it is specifically. But this United States team you got to look at is extremely young, not nearly the kind of depth that we can put out there for the Olympics team. I mean, the starting 5, Jalen Brunson, Anthony Edwards, Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, and Jaren Jackson Jr. was the starting 5. And Jaren Jackson only played 15 minutes in the game. Josh Hart only played 13 minutes. They had Tyrese Halliburton off the bench, played 19 minutes. Paolo Banchero played 17. So it was a very, very interesting game. Lithuania played tremendously. They were 5-0 in tournament play. They got a few NBA players. Jonas Valanciunas, their starting center, he had 12 points and 7 rebounds. Izzy Brazdeikis, who spent time with the Knicks, who was drafted by the Knicks, but has also spent time with the Orlando Magic. He ended up having 11 points. And Mindaugas Kuzminskis, any other Knicks fans out there who remember him, he played for the Knicks for a season, 16-17. He as well played for the Lithuania team in their victory. So they were able to knock off the USA 110-104. And the reaction from it, mainly from me, is not a very big one. It's not very meaningful. We haven't covered the FIBA tournament very much on the podcast, mainly because, it's kind of like a preseason for the Olympics almost. Next summer is going to be a different story. Next summer we got the Paris 2024 Summer Olympics, so we'll have full slate of Team USA in the actual Olympics, and we'll have a definitely much better roster too than the roster they put out for the FIBA tournament. But Anthony Edwards too has been turning some heads. He's played absolutely amazing throughout the entire tournament, and this is getting people really excited for his 4th season in the NBA. He kind of broke out and became an all-star this past season, but Edwards is an exciting player. He's athletic, great scorer, and it's going to be interesting to see what he kind of brings to the table for the Timberwolves this upcoming season. I mean, they have Karl Anthony Towns. He's always hurt. Rudy Gobert had a down year. So they're going to be looking at Edwards to almost be the go-to guy this season. And this is a Timberwolves team as well that is ready to start competing in the Western Conference. If you look at the landscape of the Western Conference, they definitely can. They have the talent to be one of the better teams. I'm not saying that they're, a Western Conference Finals kind of team with some of the other teams, but they're definitely a team that should be able to, at their best, get a top 6 seed and not have to play in the play-in for sure. Like they're a 4, 5, 6 seed, something like that, if everything's clicking. So that's made things pretty exciting for the upcoming season. And then as a Knicks fan, you got to love it too, because you got to see Josh Hart and Jalen Brunson playing together. Josh Hart just signed a 4-year extension to stick with the Knicks for a long time. Jalen Brunson signed that 4-year contract last offseason, and he's going to have 3 years left now on it. And Dante DiVincenzo also signed a 4-year contract. So you got all the Villanova guys coming in and making things like very, very exciting. So the FIBA tournament for the USA is knocked out. The championship will be held this upcoming week, I believe, and then players will shift their focus to training camp. Training camp's almost here. We are officially in September. NBA season tips off in mid to late October, and a lot of teams will be reporting to training camp soon. Some preseason games will get started. It's gonna come up very fast once we see the NFL season start to get ready. The NBA season is really close behind it. So jumping over from this to some college basketball, the ACC made some noise yesterday. They accepted 3 new schools into their conference. The ACC accepted Stanford, Cal, and SMU all into the ACC starting in the 24-25 season. As you probably remember, we reported a few weeks ago on the podcast that the ACC denied Stanford and Cal. That was true. They held a vote 3 weeks ago where all 15 of the schools had to vote, and they needed to get 12 votes, and they only got 11. But they held another vote, and they added SMU this time, and they were able to get the 12 votes they needed. And that makes a lot of people, that'll make you think, who was the school that decided to say yes? Well, NC State was actually the school that flipped their vote from no to yes, and basically allowed Stanford, Cal, and SMU to join. Clemson, Florida, and UNC were the other 3 schools that voted no, and they all decided to stay voting no. So they received only 12 votes. They put out comments to why they voted no. Florida also is one of the newest ACC schools. They made that jump over from the SEC, and so it was interesting that they would vote no. North Carolina and Clemson are 2 longtime ACC schools, so not too much of a surprise there. But they expanded from 15 schools to 18. SMU is coming from Conference USA. Now the American Conference, I should say, not Conference USA, but the SMU is coming over from the American Conference. And then Stanford and Cal are coming over from the Pac-12, as we've covered plenty over the past month. The Pac-12 continues to keep going under. They go from 4 schools now to 2 schools heading into the 24-25 season. And the 15 schools that are in the ACC already: Boston College, Clemson, Duke, Florida State, Georgia Tech, Louisville, Miami, UNC, NC State, Notre Dame, Pitt, Syracuse, Virginia, and Wake Forest are all 15 schools that are currently in the ACC, and you'll add SMU, Stanford, and Cal to this. Some reactions, as I talked about it in previous episodes of the podcast. It makes things very interesting because of the travel. So ACC is the Atlantic Coast Conference, and both California and obviously both Stanford and California are both in California. They do have some schools that are already in that are not along the Atlantic coast. Notre Dame is one. Louisville is another, but they don't have anybody as far west as California is in this conference. So this makes things very interesting. It's going to make the travel a lot more interesting too. I mean, we see the same thing in the Big Ten and the Big 12. They just accepted a bunch of Pac-12 schools as well, and a lot of the Big Ten and Big 12 schools are closer to the East Coast. Most of the West Coast teams were in the Pac-12, and with that completely folding, there's going to be a lot of travel and a lot of interesting things. I mean, 18 schools now in the ACC. We're most likely going to see 2 or 3 divisions coming out of there, and they're already inviting a few new schools in as well. So very, very interesting stuff that the ACC actually allowed Stanford and Cal to come in, as well as SMU. As of a few weeks ago, again, they had a no. They had a complete vote for no. Didn't seem like they were going to allow anybody new into the conference, but here we are. So Stanford and Cal will both be joining, and that'll leave the big question for the Pac-12. What is the Pac-12 going to do? Well, they only have 2 schools now remaining. Washington State and Oregon State are the only 2 that are still going to be in the Pac-12 after this season. So in the 24-25 season, they're still the only two. And obviously, you can't have a conference with just two teams. So clearly, the Pac-12 is going to disappear. This will be the final season of the Pac-12. The question will be, where does Washington State and where does Oregon State go? They're still looking around. The problem with both of those schools are they aren't great football schools and they aren't great basketball schools. So there's not a lot of conferences that are dying to add them. I mean, Stanford and Cal we saw get denied originally from the ACC, and those are two schools that sometimes have good football programs, but usually never have good basketball programs, especially Cal. Cal hasn't had a competitive basketball team in years. Since the early 2010s, I think is the last time that they had a very competitive team. And Stanford's always up and down. They sometimes put out some contenders, but nothing notable. SMU has actually had some good teams. They had Mike Brown was their head coach for a little bit, but he made things a little bit more interesting. But Washington State and Oregon State are almost never competitive. Oregon State's occasionally can be. They've had some history of being able to compete and putting together a few good programs for basketball wise, but they're still going to be looking around. And you haven't heard much buzz on their front. We don't really know who they're kind of looking at. They were looking at the Big Ten and the Big 12. I don't think either of those programs, either of those conferences are looking to add any new schools. They're already adding a ton. I mean, the ACC, Big 10, and Big 12 are all stacked now. All three of them all almost have 20 schools each in those conferences. I mean, those three conferences are absolutely stacked now. So I'd be surprised if the three of them were to add anybody more. That's already an insane amount that they've had. And so the two of them are probably going to have to look for conferences like the Mountain West, maybe the WCC that Gonzaga's in, one of those conferences to possibly join. So like one of those Western Conference, one of those Western region conferences, or they could end up looking at a Conference USA, maybe an American Conference or something like that. But as far as one of the big programs, I don't really see it going too well for Washington State or Oregon State. Looking for where they can jump. So just makes things a lot more interesting. Pac-12 has almost completely gone under now, and it's sad to see. Never been a huge Pac-12 fan, but this kind of goes to show you the whole Conference of Champions thing that has not been relevant in a long time. I mean, there was once upon a time the Pac-12 was lethal. They had UCLA. They had schools that were perennial stars when we're talking about basketball. But over the past 20, 30 years, it has not been the same. We've had the emergences of a bunch of other schools, more East Coast schools, who have done a lot more stuff that has kind of garnered more interest. So makes things very interesting that the Pac-12 has completely gone under, and the ACC now will have 18 schools. So this seems like it'll be the end of this drama of conference realignment, unless Washington State and Oregon State decide that they want to switch conferences anytime soon. We haven't heard almost any buzz from them. I don't know if there's even any conferences that are seriously considering them, unless that's kind of happening behind closed doors, which I mean could be the case for sure. So it'll definitely make things very interesting. So jumping over from college basketball, we got some Olympics / NBA news that we got to go over throughout the show. So Noah Lyles, who is a U.S. Olympian track and field star. He is one of the guys who they just had some track and field world championship in Budapest, where there was a lot of coverage on it. And as they're getting ready to try to field a USA team for the upcoming Olympics next summer in Paris, he's one of the biggest Olympians. He's one of the star track and field Olympians. So during one of his interviews, he went out, if you haven't heard the story already, kind of happened early last week. He went out and said that he doesn't truly respect the term world champions when it comes to NBA. Basically saying like the Denver Nuggets claiming that they're world champions is stupid because they're champions of the NBA and not of the entire world. And a bunch of NBA players clapped back at him, responded back on Twitter, and said, and basically rebutted and said, the NBA is by far the premier basketball league in the world. The bunch of players who are stars overseas are trying to come over here. So since it's the number one league in the entire world, if you win the championship, you're considered world champions. And I've had a few interesting opinions on it. I think that, first of all, I think that the whole Noah Lyles thing was a little bit uncalled for too. If you actually watch the interview, nobody really asked him about that. He kind of just brought it up on his own, almost like that's something that's like really annoyed him for a certain amount of time, and I don't really understand why. I mean, you're a U.S. Olympian, and he kind of like went off almost as like saying that the U.S. like isn't the entire world, which obviously it's not. I mean, there's my stance on it is I agree with the players. I think that I agree with the NBA players. The NBA is the premier basketball league in the world, and the best players from overseas all come to play in the NBA. That's just how it is. And since they're number one in the world, if you win the championship, you're world champions. The Denver Nuggets. If you put the Denver Nuggets up against any team in any other league in the world, they'd be the favorites to win by far. I can't think of a single league that would even put a competitive team up against them. Now, of course, anytime you have professional basketball players, anything can happen. There could be a team that upsets a U.S. NBA team, all that kind of stuff. But as far as world champions goes, that's always been the term. Nobody is using it in a derogatory fashion that I don't think should be viewed as disrespectful. It's just you say it's world champions. It's like in the MLB. It's the World Series. It's the MLB is obviously North American based, and there are several other leagues in the world. But just like basketball, baseball originated in the U.S. The greatest baseball players and basketball players in the world have all come to play in the MLB and the NBA. Most of them being American, but a good amount of them being from overseas as well. And they all gravitate towards the NBA and the MLB because it's the Premier League. If you're a star in the NBA, then you're one of the greatest basketball players on the face of the earth. Michael Jordan was the greatest basketball player in the entire world. I don't think anybody would ever argue. I mean, there's a lot of people that think LeBron James is. Doesn't matter who your argument is. If there's not a single person that would say that somebody who played their entire career in like Real Madrid or something like that is a better player than LeBron James or Michael Jordan. That's just not the case. And I found it very interesting. I found it like kind of pretty uncalled for, the comments, because I mean, he just competed in a track and field qualifier for the U.S. Olympics. I mean, he's representing the United States, and you would think that he wouldn't want to try to get a bunch of NBA players who are majority are United States born and some of the best athletes in America against him. You would think that he'd kind of want them on their side, but yeah, it was an interesting comment, very interesting comment, and that's mainly my stance on it. I agree with the players. I think that the world champion title is good for the NBA, and you can also compare it to other sports as well. You can compare it to soccer. If you win the MLS championship, they don't call them world champions because the MLS isn't the best soccer league in the world. It's not by any means. Some of the best soccer leagues in the world are European based because soccer isn't an American sport, and the most of the star players in soccer are all European born or African born or whatever it is. A lot of those guys. I mean, you see the whole Lionel Messi thing too. Him coming over to play in the MLS. He's been tearing it up because it's weaker competition than he's used to, than he's played against throughout his entire career. So nobody calls them world champions. It's not like in America being like braggadocious kind of thing. It's more so that for those sports, it's the best in the world. These sports also originated in the United States. Basketball, baseball, and American football were all, created in the United States. So the champions are considered world champions, and that's just the way it is. Nobody's kind of using it in a derogatory fashion, stating that um, that the term shouldn't be used, all that kind of stuff. But it's like the World Series being called the World Series, in my opinion. It doesn't involve the entire world, but it involves the best players that could play the sport in the entire world. A lot of them come over to play in the MLB, and that jumps things over to the Gilbert Arenas and Kenyon Martin podcast. So, talking about the Noah Lyles comments, Gilbert Arenas went on his podcast. If you ever watched his podcast, Gil's Arena, he and Kenyon Martin argued with former NBA veteran Rashad McCants about the legality of the term world champions. Both Gilbert Arenas and Kenyon Martin sided with the NBA players, saying that the NBA is by far the best competition in the world. It blows away any overseas talent and all that kind of stuff. So if you win the championship in the NBA, you're world champions. And Rashad McCants, who was a career backup big man, he played for the Timberwolves in the early 2000s for a bit, but played overseas for the majority of his career, tried to argue that some of the overseas teams could probably beat the NBA teams and make it official and make it more of a contest. And one of the notable things that was pretty hilarious, if you saw it, was Rashad McCants arguing that his Lebanon team that he played for could give the Denver Nuggets a run. He didn't say that they would beat the Denver Nuggets, but Gilbert Arenas' point that he was trying to make was, do you truly think that a team in Lebanon for one of their leagues could beat the Denver Nuggets right now, who just won the NBA championship? And his response was that they would give them a game, that they would be competitive, basically alluding to, without saying that they could win the game. He wasn't saying that they were going to win the game, but he was saying that they could win the game. And Gilbert Arenas and Kenyon Martin, both in derogatory fashion, roasted him for it. And as well as a bunch of other people who are on the podcast. Brandon Jennings was also on this episode too, and he argued Rashad McCants' point as well, which made things very interesting too. Brandon Jennings, a longtime NBA veteran, played for the Bucks for a long time and was a good player, also argued that some international teams could probably beat some NBA teams. And again, wherever you stand on this kind of argument, on the information that kind of came out about this, it's something that that it's very difficult to argue without like a bunch of known facts. I mean, if you want to make it a numbers game, then the NBA definitely puts up a lot better numbers than any other international league team, and the talent wise too. And you could also just look at the Olympics, for example. And that's just U.S. born players too. We're also talking about the international players that come over to the NBA too, because these are guys who played in the international leagues but wanted better competition and are playing in the NBA. So these guys count as the NBA's talent too. So is there really a guy who is playing overseas that doesn't want to come over to the NBA that's better than LeBron James or most of the guys in the NBA, Giannis, Nikola Jokic, Luka, whoever it is? It's an argument that you can take either side for. And I also understand too, the point that they're trying to make is that even if the NBA blows away any international league team, it's still the national champions thing still should kind of be held for like the Olympics or like the FIBA tournament or something where you're actually playing against other countries. I understand that argument. But in this sense, I think that it does make sense that if you're an NBA champion, you'd be called world champions. I mean, a lot of people do say national champions too. That's more of like a college term though, but the whole world champions thing is just a term, but you can argue either sense. Um, if you beat the other countries in the world, then you become world champions. I understand that, but I think that the sense that the NBA and other leagues have kind of come to is that they're the best league in the world. So if you win the championship in the best league in the world, you're world champions. So and there's also a ton of talent as well, that's international talent too. Like the NBA is not just American born players. I mean, there's a good chunk of it is international guys, some of the best international guys in the entire country. In the entire world, that decided to come over and jump into the NBA. So wherever you stand on it is pretty interesting. I tweeted about it on the 3 and D. You can definitely drop your comments below. Give us your opinion. Would love to go back and forth to get other people's opinion on this entire concept, the whole world champions thing. I think everybody interprets it differently. Everybody can make their own arguments as well. And it's just interesting to see. But Noah Lyles definitely sparked something, which I think that in a way that was almost his goal. Kind of there wasn't a ton of people watching the Budapest World Championship unless you're a diehard track and field fan. I mean, if you're in the United States, you're watching college football, you're watching all that kind of stuff more likely. So to kind of get his name out there, he said that, which isn't necessarily a terrible thing to do when you're looking to try to build your brand and get your name out there. But when it comes in a negative kind of way, that makes things a little bit more interesting. But that's going to wrap things up for tonight's episode. A little bit of a shorter episode, but again, we're in the dog days of summer. Summer's almost coming to an end. We'll be heating up soon with the NBA, getting ready to tip off. In about a month and a half, we'll have college basketball. In about 2 months, we'll have some previews coming up for you. We'll have some special guests. It's going to be a great time. So everybody stay tuned into the Empty the Bench Network. There's going to be a lot more coming very soon. And till next Monday, this has been another episode of the 3 and D.